Okay. Labor unions are or have played a huge role in America's workplace over centuries. Early on, or the creation of labor unions was for workers to have fair working conditions, fair wages, and the right to advocate for workers' rights or employees' rights. The federal government has had some ties into unions and union restrictions and pretty much trying to find a balance between workers going to work and being respected, and also businesses following through with that, but not one overpowering the other. And labor unions are really important. I have a labor union at my job, and I feel like it's really important for workers to advocate for workers' rights. Also, the government and the labor union's restrictions has always reflected tension between the workers and the people who runs the business or their establishment. This also goes into DEI, which is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Act or program, where people of minority-based backgrounds have a fair chance of getting a job, working, getting paid fairly, and advocating for their rights as a minority group as well, which is very important. This is why we have such things like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which requires workplace to prevent discrimination based off of race, gender, religion, and other categories, protected categories, or categories of different minority groups. The government has pushed laws. I don't want to say they have pushed laws to restrict labor unions, but more so taking away the power of the labor unions. Like, for example, the National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act, and this law strongly supports unions by giving workers or employees the right to organize and collectively bargain, which is great, which is important. However, then you have the Taft-Hartley Act, which limits the union's powers by restricting strikes and bannings and union practices. And don't agree with that, because I feel like unions should be able to speak up. They should be able to organize respectfully to get their points across, to show or to get better workplace accommodations. The last one is the right to work law, and these laws prevent unions from requiring employees to join or pay fees, which weakens unions financially and politically. And once again, this makes it harder for unions to fight and advocate for their workers properly or in a way where we are seen and heard. Also, the government has had their hands in the DEI program. Just recently, the overturning of DEI, which, again, in my opinion, DEI is important because it makes room for minority groups of people, really, to feel seen, but to also be employed, to also work and have a fair working wage without being discriminated against based off of skin color or sexuality and stuff like that. Now, these changes can affect employees by reducing workplace protection, which means if a lot of employees don't feel protected at their workplace, you lose a lot of workers. Trainings, preventive actions are also important as well. And making the workplace more inclusive, making the workplace where everybody is treated fairly. Now, the impact that some of these restrictions or laws have is it affects the freedom of speech, where some labor unions are fearful of speaking up and talking out about advocating for workers' rights. It also affects equal protection, because now we're seeing that people in these positions who are in unions and are being restricted and stuff like that don't feel equal to other people who may be getting accommodations at their workplace or whatnot. And then the workers' ability to advocate for their rights. Now, every worker, doesn't matter who they are, should always be able to advocate for whatever rights or accommodations or whatnot should happen at the workplace, because it's very important to make sure that everyone in the work field, in the unions, are treated fairly, but most importantly, are seen and heard. A couple of case studies, two case studies that I did find on this is the Starbucks unionization efforts. So Starbucks is one of my cases where they attempt to unionize hundreds of stores in their locations, and workers reported relations such as reduced hours, store close, or disciplinary actions not being followed through. And in this situation, it shows, I gotta fix that. Disciplinary actions are being followed through, and it shows how modern corporations are adapting more and more into fair treatments and equality when it comes to being in the labor unions. Also, this also helps with speaking up. So now that some of these Starbucks have better unions, they can advocate for different things in the workplace that would be helpful. Another study that I have is the DEI rollback in universities. Some states like Florida, Texas, have passed banning of DEIs and diversity inclusion training in colleges, which is, I do strongly feel like that is a dumb move, because you have everyone around the world, everywhere, who wants to go to college or who goes to college or don't come from great backgrounds, can't pay for college and stuff like that. And that is very helpful, especially for minority groups of people like Black people, Islam people, even women. So, rolling back to DEI in the universities is one of the biggest detriments that some of these universities are going to face when equality and inclusions is being talked about. And then, in conclusion, to wrap this all up, labor unions are very important. Very important. DEI, rollback, and union restriction are shaping our workforce and workplaces not for the better. A lot of people feel like advocacy in the workplace is important, and we should always promote that.